Hey guys, enjoy these new 20 stories. We hope you enjoy them. Let us know your thoughts. And as always, most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please smash that subscribe button and hit that like button too. It's free and does so much for us. We're forever grateful. Now to the stories.
Okay, so I've got a story that'll make you second guess ever trusting someone on a blind date again. I still can't fully wrap my head around it, and honestly, I wish I could forget it entirely. But it's something that stuck with me, and I'm not the kind of person who lets stuff like that slide. I'll start at the beginning, but trust me, you're going to want to hear the whole thing. I met Samantha through a mutual friend. Honestly, I wasn't even that excited about the date. I wasn't really looking for anything serious, but hey, what's the harm in going out and seeing where it goes? She seemed nice enough over text. We talked about some basic stuff: movies, music, the usual date fodder. She was cute, seemed chill, so I figured why not. The plan was to meet at this cafe near my place. It wasn't anything fancy, just a low-key spot where you could grab a drink and talk. I showed up early, got us a table, and waited. I hate being the first one there, but whatever. I was pretty relaxed about it. Maybe it was the fact that I didn't expect much from the date, or maybe I was just trying to keep it casual. Samantha showed up about 10 minutes later, a little late, but not anything crazy. She smiled when she saw me and walked over. She was pretty for sure, but there was something off about her, something I couldn't place. I guess I was too focused on the date itself to pay much attention to it at first. We sat down, and the conversation started flowing. We were talking about regular things at first: school, work, hobbies, but it wasn't long before I started noticing little things. First, she was constantly checking her phone, which I get it, we're all addicted to our phones these days. But it felt like every 5 minutes she'd glance at it, smile, and then put it back down. It wasn't anything overly suspicious, but it bugged me a little. It felt like she wasn't really all that present. Anyway, we ordered our drinks and she kept talking. But the more she talked, the more I started feeling like I wasn't really having a conversation with her. I was just listening to her go on and on about random stuff. Nothing I said seemed to interest her, and the more she talked, the more I felt like I was just there for her to get something off her chest. Then, right out of nowhere, she dropped a weird comment. She said something like, you got that vibe. I can totally tell you're the type of guy who keeps his wallet in his back pocket. Now, I know that sounds pretty harmless, but there was something about the way she said it. It wasn't like she was just making small talk or trying to joke around. It was almost like she knew something about me as she shouldn't have. I brushed it off, figuring it was just a weird comment. But I started getting this nagging feeling, that feeling when something's just not right, but you can't quite figure out what it is. As the day went on, she kept bringing up weird little things, almost like she was probing me for information. Stuff like how much I spent on things, what kind of places I like to shop at, where I usually go for a drink. I kept answering her questions, but the vibe was definitely starting to get off. After a while, she excused herself to go to the bathroom. I watched her walk away, and it wasn't until she was gone that I realized something. She'd been sitting pretty close to me the whole time. I didn't think much of it at first, but now that she was gone, I realized I'd left my wallet in my back pocket the whole time. It wasn't the kind of thing I usually think about. My wallet is always in my back pocket when I go out, but something in my gut made me check. When I felt the back of my pocket, I realized something. My wallet wasn't there. It wasn't like I'd forgotten it or left it somewhere. It was just gone. My heart started to race. I looked around, trying not to make a scene, but I couldn't see it anywhere. I stood up and casually checked under the table, hoping maybe it had slipped out. No luck. At this point, I wasn't sure what to do. My mind was racing, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe I had just misplaced it. Maybe it was still in my bag, but I was pretty sure I'd checked it earlier. That's when I noticed Samantha's bag on the chair next to me. She left it there when she went to the bathroom. Something told me I needed to check it. I didn't know why, but I just felt that I had to. I waited for a minute, my pulse pounding in my ears, then slowly reached over and grabbed her bag. I quickly unzipped it, not wanting to spend too much time on it in case she came back, but the second I peeked inside, I froze. There, at the bottom of the bag, was my wallet. I don't know why, but I felt my stomach drop. It didn't make sense. How could it have gotten there? There was no way she had just picked it up by accident, right? My mind was racing, and before I could even think about what to do next, I heard footsteps coming toward the table. I quickly shoved the wallet back into her bag and stood up, trying to act casual, but my heart was pounding in my chest. Samantha walked back over, smiling like nothing was wrong. She sat down and I couldn't help but stare at her. I didn't say anything for a few seconds, just watching her like I was waiting for her to slip up. But she didn't. She acted completely normal, like nothing had happened. Then, without really thinking, I leaned forward and said, "Hey, Samantha, I think you got something of mine in your bag." Her eyes went wide for just a second, barely noticeable, but I saw it. She immediately shook her head and gave me that fake, innocent smile. She said she didn't know how it got there, that it must have just fallen in while she was looking for something else. But I could see right through it. I wasn't buying her story. There was no way my wallet just happened to end up in her bag. I stood up and grabbed my things, not saying another word. I didn't even bother trying to confront her further. I knew something wasn't right, and I wasn't about to let her play me any longer. I walked out of that cafe without looking back. I didn't even wait for her to try and apologize or explain herself. Honestly, I didn't care anymore. I was just glad I figured it out before things got worse. I don't know what her game was, but I'm just glad I trusted my gut and didn't get stuck in whatever mess she was trying to pull. If I'd stayed any longer, who knows what could have happened. I've never been so glad to escape a situation in my life. What was supposed to be a casual blind date turned into one of the most uncomfortable, terrifying experiences I've ever had. I didn't even know how to explain it to my friends afterward, but I'll never forget it, and I doubt I'll ever forget Benny either. It all started when my friend set me up with this guy she knew from work. His name was Benny. She said he was sweet, funny, and a bit shy, but all around a great guy. We texted a bit before the date, and he seemed cool enough. We decided to meet at this restaurant nearby that wasn't too fancy but had great reviews. I thought it'd be a nice, chill first meeting. I get there, and Benny's already waiting. He's tall, dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans, and he has a nervous smile on his face. He's actually kind of cute. I didn't think much of it, just thought I was there to meet someone new, maybe make a new friend. But things started to feel off when I realized Benny wasn't alone. There were two other guys with him, and they were sitting at the table as well, acting like it was no big deal. I didn't want to make a scene, so I just took a seat, trying to roll with it. They weren't exactly making eye contact with me at first, but they were loud and laughing, joking around. Benny introduced me to his friends, both of them in their mid-20s. There was Mark, who was a little too confident for my taste, and Jason, who just seemed a bit weird, like he was trying too hard to be cool. I thought maybe this was just how Benny hung out with his friends, but something about it felt wrong. As we all started chatting, they kept glancing at me in this way that made me uncomfortable. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but the comments started coming in slowly, one after the other like little jabs I wasn't prepared for. Mark was the first one to say anything that made my stomach drop. He looked at me for a second too long, then made a comment about my outfit. He said something like, "Wow, you're rocking that top. I mean, you're definitely not shy about showing off your assets." It wasn't exactly a compliment. It wasn't even flirtatious. It felt like he was just pointing out something for the sake of making me feel awkward. I tried to laugh it off, thinking it was just one weird comment from an idiot. But then Jason chimed in, saying something about how she's got some curves. And it wasn't a nice comment, not at all. It was like they were both inspecting me, commenting on my body as though it was some kind of display for them to rate. Benny, who I thought would be the one to maybe step in and stop his friends, just sat there and smiled nervously. He didn't say anything to defend me. Instead, he just kept looking at me like he was waiting for me to react. And honestly, at this point, I was starting to feel trapped. They kept talking about how I looked, how I was dressed, making comments like I was an object. It felt gross. Mark kept nudging Benny, saying things like, "Man, she could totally hang out with us more often. You got some good taste." The worst part, Benny didn't do anything. He didn't tell him to stop. He didn't even look embarrassed. It was as if this was normal for them, and I was just supposed to take it. I started to feel my face flush, but I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to embarrass myself, but every second that passed felt like it was stretching longer than it should. I started feeling like I needed to leave, but I didn't know how to do it without seeming rude. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting or if this was genuinely as messed up as I thought it was. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Mark dropped the bomb. He casually asked, "So, when are you coming over to our place? Benny told us you were cool and we're all hanging out there later. You should come by." I froze. I didn't know how to respond. Was this normal? Was this what guys were like on blind dates now? It felt like a setup, like they were trying to rope me into something I didn't sign up for. Then he finally spoke up, and he said something along the lines of, "Yeah, we're all roommates. It'd be fun, but it wasn't fun. It wasn't funny. It felt like pressure. It felt like a trap." I could feel my heart racing. I realized I had to get out of there. This wasn't a date. This was just them using me for whatever the hell they wanted. I couldn't let it go on any longer, but I wasn't sure how to leave without making a big deal of it. I looked around trying to come up with a plan. That's when I saw the bathroom. I didn't even think twice. I grabbed my purse and stood up, excusing myself like I needed to use the restroom. The moment I stepped away from the table, my brain was running a million miles an hour. I walked straight to the bathroom, trying to keep my face calm, but inside I was panicking. I knew I had to get out of there before it got worse. Once inside the bathroom, I locked the door behind me and just took a deep breath. I was starting to freak out. I knew I couldn't go back to that table. I couldn't deal with whatever weird, uncomfortable thing they were about to pull next. I checked my phone quickly. Nothing urgent. But I didn't care. I was just looking for a reason to leave. I could hear Mark and Jason talking in the distance, their voices muffled through the walls. It sounded like they were still joking about whatever the hell they had been talking about before. I didn't care. I didn't even want to be near them anymore. I quickly grabbed my things, opened the bathroom window, and climbed out. I didn't look back. I knew it wasn't the best way to leave, but I wasn't about to walk back into that mess. I didn't even say goodbye to Benny. I didn't know him anything, and I definitely wasn't going to put myself in a situation where I felt unsafe or disrespected. I bolted out of the restaurant, and that was the last time I ever saw any of them. I didn't text Benny. I didn't answer any of his calls. That night was the worst blind date I've ever been on, and I still think about it sometimes. I learned a lot that night about reading red flags, about knowing when to walk away, and about how sometimes things that seem harmless at first can turn really ugly really quickly. I've got this crazy story about a blind date that went totally off the rails, and I still can't believe it happened to me. Honestly, I never thought I'd get sucked into something like this, but it was one of those situations where you just kind of go with the flow, and then realize way too late that you made a huge mistake. I'm not the kind of guy who's easily fooled, but this one really got me. It all started when I matched with this girl named Hannah on a dating app. We'd been talking for a few days, and everything seemed normal at first. She was pretty chill and funny, and we had a lot in common, or at least that's what I thought. We talked about school, hobbies, music, and a bit about the stuff we like to do in our free time. At first, I wasn't even really thinking of it as a date. It felt more like one of those casual hangouts you do with a friend. So, one day she asked me if I'd like to meet up. I'm thinking, all right, sounds cool. And then she hits me with the location, the library. I don't know about you, but that seemed a little off to me at first. I mean, who has a blind date at the library? It was one of those places where you go when you need to study or get away from distractions. But whatever, maybe she's into books or something. Maybe it was her vibe. Anyway, I get to the library, and I'm already feeling kind of weird about it. I walk in, and it's quiet, way too quiet for a first date, in my opinion. I mean, I was just expecting a place to chill and chat, not the setting of some dramatic scene in a movie. But there she was, sitting at a table in the corner, looking like she was already set up for something. She waves me over with this sweet smile, and I sit down across from her. She looked cute, but there was something about her that didn't quite sit right. Maybe it was just the environment. Who wants to have a first date in a place where you're supposed to be quiet the whole time? At first, things were normal enough. We talked about some general stuff. School, how her day had been, random little things. But after a while, she kept steering the conversation in a way that started to make me feel, well, a little off. She'd ask these weird, specific questions, like about my classes and my grades. I'm not saying it was completely out of the ordinary, but the way she asked just felt kind of intense. Like she was really digging for information way more than you'd expect on a first date. But whatever, maybe she was just curious. I mean, I was a little on edge, but I didn't want to be rude or assume anything. I just figured we'd wrap it up soon and go grab coffee or something, and it'd all be fine. Then things took a hard left turn. After a while, she pulls out a notebook and starts flipping through it. She tells me she's been struggling with a couple of subjects. Nothing unusual, right? Everyone has their hard subjects. But then she starts going into detail about how she needs help with a few of her courses, and she doesn't understand some concepts, and she just has to pass. Now, at this point, I'm already thinking, okay, this is kind of strange, but whatever. People sometimes need help. But then it hit me. She starts asking if I could explain some of the stuff she's been struggling with. She starts throwing out some specific problems from her classes and asking for solutions. I thought it was weird, but I was like, okay, sure, I'm good at that kind of thing. I can help out. So I start explaining some of the stuff she's asking about, but the more I talk, the more I realize she's not really listening like someone would if they were just trying to learn. It was more like she was asking questions to drag out the conversation, like the whole reason she asked me out was just to use me as some kind of free tutor. The more I think about it, the more I'm starting to feel used, and it was starting to bug me. But I couldn't back out, right? I was already there, and it wasn't like she was being rude or anything. She was still acting sweet, still smiling. But she kept pulling out more notebooks, more assignments, asking for more help. I didn't know what to do. I kept trying to turn the conversation back to something normal, but she would just circle back to, oh, I really don't understand this one topic. And that was that. The next thing I knew had been hours, and I was basically tutoring her. I didn't even realize I had been talking for so long until I looked at my phone and saw how much time had passed. I mean, I'm a nice guy, but it's not like I signed up to sit there for an entire evening teaching her algebra or whatever random stuff she kept throwing at me. It was way beyond a normal first date. I felt like I was doing homework in the middle of a weird, forced study session. And all the while, she was acting like it was totally normal to just drag me through all this crap with no break. I wanted to leave, but I didn't know how to do it without coming off as rude. At the same time, I kept thinking, this isn't what a first date is supposed to be like. This isn't a date at all. I felt trapped, honestly. It didn't help that the library was getting emptier by the minute, and I had no idea when this would end. At one point, I just kind of snapped. I stopped explaining things and told her I had to go, because I did. I was done. I wasn't even mad, I just felt used. And she didn't even seem to realize it. She just smiled and said something like, I'm glad I could finally get some help. Maybe we can do this again sometime. And that was when I knew I had been played. I couldn't believe I'd fallen for it. She hadn't wanted to go on a date. She didn't care about me at all. She just wanted a free tutor for her schoolwork. I had been the one who'd wasted hours of my day helping her out, and I had nothing to show for it. I was just her personal study buddy. After that, I couldn't even bring myself to respond when she texted me later. If anyone ever suggests a date at a library, just assume they're using you for something. Trust me, you don't want to get stuck in a situation like that. It was supposed to be a fun, low-key blind date. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Honestly, when Andy suggested the park, I thought it sounded cute. He seemed nice enough over text, easygoing and a little quirky. Nothing seemed off. But looking back, I should have known. The whole thing felt wrong from the start, but I didn't trust my instincts. At the time, I just wanted to have a normal date. We had been talking for a few weeks before deciding to meet. I wasn't exactly excited, but I wasn't dreading it either. I was just hoping it wouldn't be awkward. We agreed to meet at a local park, which seemed like a good idea. Fresh air, wide open space, and some benches to sit on if the conversation got dry. No big deal. I showed up a little early, mostly because I hate being late and I wasn't sure what to expect. I thought maybe he'd be there already, but I was the only one standing there. The park was pretty empty, but I figured it was just a slow evening. It wasn't until I sat on a bench and checked my phone that I noticed how quiet everything was. There weren't any kids running around or people walking dogs, and even the wind had died down. Just the occasional rustle of leaves. It was weird. I texted Andy to let him know I was there. He replied quickly, saying he'd be there soon. I didn't think much of it, but something felt off. The park is a nice place during the day, but it's one of those spots that gets completely deserted as soon as the sun starts setting. And that's exactly what started happening. The daylight quickly faded, and the park was practically empty by the time Andy arrived. He texted me again, saying he was walking through the path near the back, so I stood up to meet him. But the more I walked toward the path, the more uncomfortable I felt. The park was darker now, and there was no sign of anyone else around. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but when I looked, no one was there. I told myself it was probably just my imagination. I didn't realize how far into the park Andy wanted to walk. When I finally saw him, he was standing just beyond the trees, his figure barely visible in the dim light. I waved, but he didn't wave back. For a second, I froze, wondering if it was actually him. It was strange. He was standing still in this very isolated part of the park. Maybe he was just waiting for me, but I didn't like how far out he was from the main area. The path was so narrow, and the trees on both sides cast long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. I called out his name, but there was no response. I took a few steps forward, and my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. I looked around. The whole place felt too quiet. The park was practically abandoned, and now it was getting dark enough that I could barely see my own hand in front of my face. The trees, the darkened path, the total absence of other people, it all made me uneasy. Something in the back of my mind was telling me to turn around and leave, but I didn't want to look rude or like I was overreacting. So I pushed those feelings aside and kept walking. My eyes were locked on the figure ahead, and as I got closer, it became clearer that it was indeed Andy. He was standing just beyond the trees, almost like he was waiting for something or someone. But there was something off about his posture. He wasn't just standing casually like you would expect on a date. It was as though he was waiting for me to approach, but he didn't seem eager to engage. I felt that tightening in my chest, that feeling of unease that I couldn't ignore anymore. I took a few more steps, but as I got closer, I started to have second thoughts. I called his name again, a little louder this time, hoping he'd hear me and turn around. But he didn't. I thought maybe he hadn't heard me, so I called out again. Still nothing. I was now only a few feet away, but I didn't like the way he was standing there, just so still, like he was frozen in place. I was close enough now that I could see his face, but there was something about his expression that threw me off. He didn't look like the guy I had been texting. His face seemed blank, almost vacant. I called his name one more time, but something in me made me stop before I reached him. My heart was pounding, and my instincts were screaming at me to turn around. For a moment, I felt like I was being watched. I glanced around quickly, but there was no one there. The park was completely empty. The only sound was the rustling of the wind through the trees. It felt so isolated, like I was the only one left in the world. I looked back at Andy. His face hadn't changed, and I still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I should have turned around then, I know that now. But I just stood there, frozen, staring at him, waiting for some sign that everything was okay. But nothing happened. I stepped forward, my mind racing, telling me to be brave, but my feet refused to move any closer. I wasn't even sure why I was hesitating. I think part of me was hoping it was just my overactive imagination. But another part of me, deep down, knew I had to get out of there. I took one last look at Andy, then turned around and walked as quickly as I could. My heart was still pounding in my chest, and I felt like someone was following me. But when I glanced over my shoulder, there was nothing. I don't know how I got out of that park so fast. I think I just sprinted to the nearest exit and didn't stop until I was in the safety of a crowded street. I never heard from Andy again after that night. I didn't even want to. I have no idea what was going on with him or why he acted that way, but I didn't feel safe. Something was off the entire time, and in hindsight, I'm glad I trusted my instincts. I don't know if I'll ever go to that park again. Maybe I'll never know what was really going on that night, but I do know one thing for sure. I'll trust my gut the next time I feel like something is wrong. And I'll never go on a date in a deserted park at dusk ever again. Alright, so buckle up. I've got a story that still creeps me out every time I think about it. It all started with a blind date that I almost didn't even want to go on. But my friends were like, oh, come on, give it a shot. It'll be fun. So, yeah, I went, and that was the first mistake. The second mistake, the girl, Shelley, or should I say the many Shelleys. I didn't know what I was walking into, honestly. I had been chatting with her online for a couple of weeks, and she seemed like an easygoing person. Normal, even. She had a thing for anime, which I could totally get behind, nothing too out there. She mentioned she was into cosplay, but I didn't think much of it. I figured she'd show up in a cute outfit or something, just a casual fan thing. But when I got to the restaurant, I almost didn't recognize her at first. She was standing by the door, waiting for me. I mean, I thought it was her, but she was wearing this full-on, serious cosplay. I don't even know how to describe it. Like, it wasn't just a costume. It was her entire identity in that moment. She was dressed like some character from a show I'd never heard of. Huge cloak, big sword, wild hair, like she was straight up about to go on an adventure. The first thought that went through my head was, is this a joke? But no, there she was smiling, eyes shining like she was proud of herself. She didn't seem embarrassed or anything, and to be honest, I couldn't just bail now. It felt weird. I mean, I didn't want to look like a jerk, right? So I walked up, said hello, and we went inside. The whole dinner was strange, not uncomfortable at first, but just different from anything I'd ever done. She was super into talking about her cosplay, about how it was her passion. She kept saying stuff like, I feel like I'm becoming the character, and how when she's in costume, it's like all her problems melt away. At first, it was interesting, like, okay, I get it. She's into this, and that's cool. I didn't want to judge. But then, as the night went on, things started getting a little off. I started noticing that every time I tried to steer the conversation towards something normal, she'd steer it right back to cosplay. Or even weirder, she'd talk about who she was today. She'd say things like, I'm not Shelley tonight. I'm Soren, the great warrior, and I'll protect you. And it was kind of charming in an odd way at first. She was really into it, but as the night went on, I was starting to wonder if I was actually on a date or some kind of weird roleplay scenario. The weirdest part, it wasn't even the costume. It was the fact that she seemed so confused about who she was when she wasn't in character. Like, I'd ask her a simple question about what she did for fun or what she liked to do when she wasn't cosplaying, and she'd get this lost look in her eyes, like she didn't even know who Shelley was anymore. It wasn't like she was playing along with a joke. No, this was legit. I'm not sure if I was more disturbed or just really confused at that point. By the end of the date, we were walking back to our cars. She was talking like she was winding down, but it didn't feel like a normal end to a date. Instead of a hey, I had a great time, or maybe we can do this again sometime, she says, and I swear I'll never forget this. I'm not always like this. I have other personalities too. Just, depends on the day. And she smiled, like it was no big deal. My stomach twisted. I didn't even know what to say. Was she joking? Did she mean she has different moods or something? No, she didn't. It was like she was talking about full-on different versions of herself. I was trying to laugh it off, like, okay, that's a weird way to end a date, but she didn't seem bothered by my awkwardness. She just kept saying that she felt more herself when she was in costume, that each of her personas helped her cope with things. And that was it. She hopped in her car, waved goodbye, and drove off, leaving me standing there like an idiot. I was left to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing, but nope. The next date rolled around, and you bet she showed up again. This time, though, it was even weirder. When she walked into the cafe, I swear I almost didn't recognize her. She wasn't in cosplay this time. Oh no, she was dressed like a guy. I'm talking a full-on man outfit. Button-up shirt, slacks, a wave that was short and combed back, even a fake mustache. I was so caught off guard that I couldn't even speak for a second. I didn't even know what to do. She was acting the same way as before, like she was playing this role again. But this time she was Craig, the guy who was in control and had his life together. The entire time we were sitting there, she didn't talk about anything real. She just kept switching back and forth between the character she was at the moment and whatever version of herself she was trying to convince me she was. It was exhausting. I felt like I was talking to a completely different person every few minutes. By the time the night was over, I had no idea what had just happened. Was Shelley even real? Or was she just some weird game she was playing, constantly switching identities? At one point, she even told me she had a third persona she only brought out when she was feeling wild. That was the breaking point for me. I didn't know if I should call her out, run for the hills, or just let her keep doing whatever the hell this was. I chose the second option. I didn't call her again after that. I blocked her on everything. It's been a while now, and I'm still not sure if Shelley was just super messed up or if she was genuinely just that out there. But I'm not looking for any more dates where I have to wonder if I'm dating a whole cast of characters instead of one person. I haven't heard from her since, but I don't think I want to either. So yeah, if anyone ever asks me about blind dates again, I'll tell them, don't date anyone who tells you they have many personalities. Just trust me on this one. Let me tell you about the weirdest blind date I ever went on. Honestly, I still can't decide if it was a joke or if I just somehow ended up in a horror movie. This happened last month, and it was supposed to be the night I finally got to meet Tommy, the guy my mom had been talking about for weeks. She was all excited, saying how he was perfect for me. We both knew she wasn't exactly the best judge of character, but still I agreed. How bad could it be, right? I remember sitting at the kitchen table, glancing at the clock, waiting for the time to come. My mom had gone all out for this date. She made dinner, something weirdly fancy that I would normally touch with a 10-foot pole, and had spent the last hour obsessing over how I looked. To be fair, I wasn't looking too shabby. I wasn't going to show up in sweats or anything, but I didn't want to go all out either. It was just a blind date, right? I threw on some jeans, a cute top, and figured I'd look fine enough. But as the minutes ticked by, I was starting to feel a little uneasy. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because of the way my mom was acting. She'd been on edge all day, running around and checking everything like I was about to meet royalty or something. I could already tell she was more excited about this date than I was. Finally, the doorbell rang. I swear my mom practically sprinted to the door. She opened it, and I saw him. Tommy. But honestly, he didn't look anything like I expected. My mom had told me he was handsome and kind of shy, so I was picturing someone with soft brown hair, maybe a little nerdy but in a cute way. This guy, he was huge. Not just big in a muscular way. He was round, and I'm not talking about a little belly. He looked like he spent all his time in his mom's basement, eating pizza and watching anime. He had this scruffy red hair that didn't look like it was ever combed, and the thickest glasses I've ever seen. Not kidding. His glasses looked like they were stolen from a thrift store in the 90s. His clothes didn't help either. He was wearing a black t-shirt with some anime character on it, and the sleeves were way too short for his arms. He looked like he was trying to be cool or whatever, but it just came across as awkward. At first, I didn't even know what to say. He just stood there in the doorway, staring at me in this weird, unblinking way. My mom immediately started gushing about how nice it was to finally meet him, and I just kind of stood there, waiting for him to say something, anything. When he finally spoke, it wasn't what I was expecting either. He didn't say something normal like, "Hey, it's nice to meet you." No, he just stared at me for a second, then muttered something about how I didn't look like my pictures. I mean, who says that? Yeah, I get it. Maybe I didn't look exactly the same as my profile picture. Who does? But it was a weird first thing to say, right? I tried to brush it off, but he kept going on, telling me I looked different in person, but not in a wow, you look even better than your picture kind of way. It was more like he was disappointed. At this point, I wanted to just make a run for it. But no, of course, my mom was already pulling out the dinner, so I was kind of stuck. And the worst part, he didn't even apologize for the weird comment. Instead, he kept talking about his collection and how much time he spent on YouTube reviewing random shows I'd never even heard of. The way he talked, it was like he was bragging, but he also didn't have the social awareness to realize no one cared. But the thing was, it wasn't just his nerdy interest that weirded me out. It was the way he looked at me. Like, his eyes were glued to my face, but not in a normal way. It was like he was inspecting me, trying to figure out if I was some kind of puzzle piece he could figure out. And then there were the comments. The ones that made me feel all sorts of uncomfortable. He said something about how I had big eyes for an anime girl, and then asked me if I liked anime girls in real life. I didn't even know how to answer that. I just kind of laughed nervously and told him I wasn't into it. But that didn't stop him. Oh, no. He kept pushing it. Asking if I watch anime, if I knew any obscure shows, if I thought the characters were hot. Like, seriously, who even talks like this on a first date? And the whole time, my mom didn't seem to notice how awkward things were. She was sitting there smiling like she had just set out the perfect match, while I was just sitting there dying inside. I was waiting for the date to end. I kept glancing at the clock, hoping it would speed up, but of course it didn't. Dinner was another mess. He didn't eat like a normal person. He was shoveling food into his mouth with no care for anything, spilling stuff on himself, chewing loudly, and even licking his fingers. I swear, I could hear his lips smacking every time he took a bite, and I was so grossed out that I couldn't even focus on the conversation. My mom kept trying to engage him in this small talk about his hobbies and dreams, but he kept cutting her off, talking about how cool it would be if real life were more like the anime he watched. At one point, I even saw him staring at the food like he was going to start comparing it to some food scene from a show. That's when I really had enough. Finally, the night ended. I don't even remember exactly how I got out of there, but I made it clear I wasn't interested. My mom, though, she was convinced Tommy was a great guy and that I just needed to give him a chance. It took everything in me not to scream. I mean, I couldn't even imagine going out with this guy again. That was my blind date with Tommy. I still don't know what my mom was thinking, but I'm pretty sure she was just too wrapped up in her own idea of romance to see what was really going on. Maybe it was all just a big joke, but whatever it was, it's not something I'll forget anytime soon. I definitely won't be taking any more recommendations from my mom. It's funny how sometimes things don't go the way you expect them to. You think you're just going out for a simple date, just meeting someone new and seeing where things go. But then, sometimes the universe has other plans. I met Alan through a dating app a few weeks ago. We hit it off immediately, or at least that's how it seemed to me. His profile was interesting, smart, funny, into the same things as me. We exchanged messages for a few days before we set up a date. He suggested a small cafe near my place, so we picked a time. I showed up, and then nothing. I was there first, which honestly didn't bother me. I'm always early, so I sat at one of the small tables by the window, sipping on my iced tea, glancing at my phone every now and then. Time passed. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Maybe he was running late, I thought. No big deal. But by the time 30 minutes had passed, I was starting to get a little annoyed. It's one thing to be late, but it's another to not even text and let me know. Still, I didn't want to be rude and leave just yet. Maybe he was stuck in traffic. Maybe he got caught up at work. I sent him a quick message asking if everything was okay, but there was no response. After another 20 minutes of sitting there, I decided to call it. I wasn't going to waste my time waiting around for someone who couldn't even be bothered to show up. I left the cafe feeling a little disappointed. It wasn't like I had high expectations or anything, but I figured a blind date would at least be a chance to meet someone interesting. As I walked back to my car, I thought about how much of a waste of an evening it had been. I got home and just threw myself on the couch, scrolling through social media to distract myself from the awkwardness of the night. A couple of hours later, I got a text from an unknown number. I opened it, expecting it to be some kind of apology for him being late. Instead, the message was completely unexpected. "Hey, I'm really sorry about not showing up earlier. Something came up, but can we try again sometime?" At first, I didn't know how to respond. He was apologizing, but it didn't explain why he hadn't reached out at all. I was still mad, but a small part of me wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. I replied with something short and polite, just as simple as "fine, but I don't know if I'm interested anymore." That was the end of that, or so I thought. About a week later, I ran into Alan in the most random way. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I had gone to the grocery store. I was just grabbing some stuff when I spotted a guy standing at the checkout counter ahead of me. He was holding a carton of milk and seemed to be talking to the cashier. I didn't pay much attention to him at first, just the usual routine of trying to get in and out of the store quickly. But then when I got closer, I saw his face, and I recognized him. It was Alan. I froze for a second staring at him. Was this a coincidence? I couldn't be sure, but the more I looked at him, the more certain I was that it was him. The same guy from the dating app. The same guy who had stood me up. But why was he here in the grocery store? And why didn't he even acknowledge me? I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to walk up to him and confront him about the date. I wanted to ask him why he didn't show up, why he didn't even bother to text me back. But the other part of me was just too caught off guard to do anything. Instead, I stood there for a few seconds, unsure of what to say or do. He had paid for his items and was walking toward the exit, not even glancing in my direction. I figured I'd just let it go and go on with my day. But as I turned to walk to my car, something strange happened. I saw him again. This time he was standing outside the store, talking to a woman. My first thought was that maybe he was just chatting with a friend or something. But as I got closer, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The woman he was talking to wasn't just any woman, it was my sister. I don't know what happened next. I felt this weird, sick feeling settle in my stomach. I stood there for a few seconds, watching them talk, and I realized this wasn't just a coincidence. Alan was dating my sister. I don't know why I stood there watching them as they exchanged words. I could tell by the way they looked at each other that they were close. Too close. And my heart started to race. Was I seeing things clearly? What the hell was going on? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my mind started racing. The more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense. Alan had never seemed serious about our date. He never even bothered to show up. Was he already seeing my sister when he agreed to meet me? Did he have some weird game plan in mind? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to march over to them and confront Alan. Another part of me wanted to turn around and pretend like I hadn't seen anything. But then I saw them hug. That was it. That was when I couldn't stand there any longer. I didn't know what to say or what to do, but I turned and left the parking lot as fast as I could, heart pounding in my chest. The whole thing felt like a weird, twisted joke, and I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I couldn't stop thinking about how he had stood me up, how he had acted like I meant nothing, only to turn up with my sister just a few days later. To this day, I've never said anything to her about it. I don't know how to. I still don't know what Alan's deal was or if he was using me for some reason. But I do know one thing. Sometimes when you think you've met someone, it turns out they've been hiding something all along. And in this case, it was a lot more than I ever expected. I don't think I'll ever go on another blind date again after that night. I don't even know how I managed to survive it. It was supposed to be a chill, low-pressure date, a simple meetup at the gym, get to know each other while doing something active, maybe break the ice with some light conversation. Instead, it turned into a nightmare that I couldn't get out of fast enough. I met Anthony through a dating app. His profile seemed pretty decent. He was funny, kind of quirky, and said he loved staying fit. So I thought, why not? I liked the idea of meeting up at a gym since it felt more casual and relaxed. I didn't want anything too formal or fancy for a first date, so this seemed like the perfect way to start. I got to the gym early, mostly because I wasn't sure where to park or what entrance to use. I figured I'd just wait for Anthony to show up. The gym wasn't packed, but there were enough people around to make it feel normal. It had that clean, fresh gym smell, freshly mopped floors mixed with the faint scent of sweat and protein shakes. I didn't mind it. I was used to it. I was pacing around, figuring out where to meet him, when he finally texted me that he was outside. I had a moment of hesitation when I saw him walk in. He was definitely not what I was expecting. He was taller than his pictures, which wasn't bad, but there was something about the way he carried himself that felt a little off. I can't explain it exactly. Maybe it was the way he constantly checked himself out of the mirrors or how his smile seemed a little forced. But I tried to push it out of my mind. After all, first impressions can be tricky. We started walking around the gym, and he asked if I was into lifting or cardio more. It was a basic gym question, and we started talking about our workout routines. Everything seemed fine at first, but then his friend, Matt, showed up. Matt worked there, so he was walking around checking on things, and Anthony greeted him with a handshake. Matt was definitely one of those guys who thinks he's the funniest person in the room, and from the moment he started talking, I knew I was in trouble. He came over to Anthony and immediately started teasing him about the date. At first, I thought it was just playful banter, but then it quickly crossed a line. Matt made some joke about Anthony needing to upgrade to a girl who actually fit his level. I didn't get it at first, so I just laughed awkwardly, hoping they'd move on. But Matt didn't stop. It wasn't just a one-off comment. He kept making little jabs about how Anthony could do better, and how there were so many other girls in the gym. It was like he was trying to tear Anthony down, and by extension, make me feel like I didn't measure up. Every time Matt opened his mouth, I could see Anthony getting more and more uncomfortable, but he didn't speak up. He just kind of went along with it. I kept hoping it would end, but it only got worse. Matt started talking about the women who worked out there, pointing out girls lifting weights, talking about their hot physiques, and how Anthony wasn't using his full potential. He kept saying that Anthony could have his pick of the best girls at the gym. The way he said it made me feel like I wasn't even standing there, like I was invisible, or worse, like I was a joke. It was bizarre. Here I was trying to have a fun, normal date, and his friend was treating me like I wasn't even worth acknowledging. I kept looking at Anthony for some kind of reaction, something to show he cared, but he just stood there like a deer in headlights. It was like he was too afraid to speak up, too afraid to challenge his friend's behavior. I could tell that Matt had more power in their dynamic than Anthony did. It felt like Anthony was just going along with whatever Matt said, and I wasn't sure whether to feel sorry for him or disgusted by the whole situation. I tried to laugh it off, even though the comments kept getting worse. Matt made a joke about how I didn't even look like I worked out, that maybe I was just there for the aesthetic of the gym, and that maybe I'd be better off on the treadmill. My face went hot, and for the first time I didn't know what to do. I wasn't mad at Anthony. Well, not completely, but I couldn't understand why he wasn't standing up for me. He just kept standing there, silently taking it, not even looking at me like I was someone he cared about. As the night dragged on, I realized something was seriously wrong. Matt wasn't just teasing Anthony, he was actively putting him down in front of me, and I couldn't tell if it was intentional or just his messed up sense of humor. Anthony barely said anything in his defense, and I started to wonder if he actually agreed with Matt. Maybe he thought I wasn't good enough. Maybe he was ashamed to be with me. The thought made me feel sick to my stomach. It wasn't just the remarks that were getting to me. It was the way Anthony wasn't standing up for himself. It made me question everything about him. How could someone let their friend talk about them like that? How could someone not say something when it was obviously making their date uncomfortable? I tried to make an excuse to leave, pretending I had an early morning. But the problem was I didn't have a good excuse. I just didn't want to be there anymore. I felt humiliated, and the date had completely turned into a nightmare. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, and once I was out of sight, I bolted. I didn't even stop to say goodbye. I didn't owe him an explanation. I just had to get out. When I left the gym, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief. I kept thinking back to how passive Anthony was throughout the whole thing, and it made me realize that this wasn't just about Matt's bad jokes. It was about Anthony letting his friend dictate everything. The worst part was that he didn't even seem to care that I was uncomfortable. He was just going with the flow, letting Matt steer everything, and I wasn't about to be a part of that. The whole experience left a bad taste in my mouth. I blocked him on everything when I got home, and I've never looked back. There's no way I could ever go on another blind date after that, especially not one at a gym where I had to compete with the likes of Matt and his toxic attitude. I should have known something was off from the moment I saw Sharon. Not because she looked weird or anything, quite the opposite, actually. She was beautiful in a kind of effortless way, like she didn't have to try. Dark hair, piercing eyes, this casual, confident vibe that made her seem a little intimidating. But it wasn't her looks that set me on edge. It was the way she carried herself. It felt like there was something hidden beneath the surface, something that wasn't being said. We met online a few weeks earlier, and after a couple of decent chats, we agreed to meet up, which was a quiet cafe in town, the kind of place that wasn't too busy but still had a decent crowd. I wasn't expecting anything special. I just wanted to meet a cool person, maybe make a new friend or see if there was a spark. Sharon seemed easygoing enough in our messages, so I didn't think it'd be anything out of the ordinary. I got there a little early, found a table at a window, and ordered a coffee. I sat there for a few minutes, checking my phone, wondering what she was going to be like in person. I'd been on a few blind dates before, so I wasn't really nervous, just a bit curious. The door opened, and in walked Sharon. The first thing I noticed was her red skirt. It wasn't anything crazy, but it was bright enough that it caught my attention. She had this confident, almost nonchalant stride as she made her way to my table. I stood up to greet her, trying to keep it cool, but there was something in her eyes that immediately made me feel like I was about to get sucked into something I wasn't prepared for. She smiled when she saw me, and we exchanged pleasantries, all the normal first date stuff. We sat down, and I could tell she wasn't nervous. She was one of those people who seemed completely comfortable in their own skin, which I'll admit was a bit intimidating. But still, we talked. At first, it was the usual, where are you from, what do you do for a living, stuff like that. It was fine. I wasn't expecting fireworks, but it was nice to have a conversation with someone who seemed intelligent and well-spoken. But then things took a turn. We were about 20 minutes into the date when she did something that immediately made me second-guess everything. Sharon reached into her skirt pocket, pulled out a small bag, and placed it on the table. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Inside the bag were what looked like small pills. My stomach churned as she casually slid the bag closer to me. "Want to try some?" she asked, her voice calm, almost playful. She didn't even look nervous or ashamed, just totally chill, like she was offering me a piece of candy or something. At first, I didn't even know how to respond. My mind was racing, trying to process what was happening. I couldn't believe she was sitting there on a first date, offering me drugs like it was no big deal. I thought about just walking out right then and there, but I didn't want to make a scene. I also wasn't sure if she was testing me or just genuinely acting like this was normal. I didn't say anything for a long moment, just staring at the bag on the table. She didn't seem to care, though. She was already looking around the cafe, almost like she was bored. There was a part of me that thought maybe she was just messing with me, like testing my boundaries or trying to see how I'd react. But then again, the more I thought about it, the more I realized she wasn't joking. She wasn't waiting for me to laugh it off. She was serious. At that point, I was feeling weirdly trapped. Part of me wanted to just say no and leave, but I didn't want to look like some uptight weirdo. I didn't want to seem judgmental or prudish, but the other part of me, my gut, was screaming at me to just get up and walk out. This wasn't the kind of person I wanted to be around. I told myself to stay calm, that I was just overthinking things. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but I also didn't want to take whatever that was. I had no idea what it was, and honestly, I wasn't about to find out. So I took a deep breath and politely declined. I told her I wasn't into that kind of thing, that I didn't do drugs, and that it wasn't my scene. She didn't get upset, but there was this brief flash of annoyance in her eyes. It was subtle, but I saw it. She didn't argue with me, though. Instead, she just shrugged it off like it didn't matter. But it didn't stop there. After that awkward moment, she started talking more freely about her lifestyle. She told me how she liked to live on the edge, how she didn't really care about the consequences of her actions. She went on about how she wasn't into rules or normal people stuff, and how I seemed like a good boy who probably never stepped outside his comfort zone. I was still trying to process everything, but now I was starting to feel really uncomfortable. This wasn't the kind of person I thought I was meeting. She was practically daring me to do something risky, to step into her world of chaos. It felt like I was being pushed into something I didn't want to be a part of. After a few more minutes of awkward silence and uncomfortable small talk, I finally decided to cut the date short. I said I had an early morning and had to go. She seemed a little disappointed, but didn't make a scene. She just smiled, stood up, and walked out with me. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief when I got into my car and drove off. The whole experience had been strange, unsettling, and honestly kind of dangerous. I still don't know what would have happened if I'd taken the drugs she offered. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. I wonder if she was just playing a weird game or if this was genuinely how she lived her life. I'll never know, but I'm just glad I trusted my gut. That date could have ended very differently. I'd never thought a simple blind date could spiral so quickly into a nightmare. I always thought I was good at reading people, and honestly, I was excited to meet Chase. We'd been texting for a while, and everything seemed normal enough. He was charming, funny, and seemed like a guy who knew what he wanted. I'd seen his pictures, and I won't lie, he was good looking and a bit of a jock, but still approachable. I thought, why not? Let's see where this goes. We decided to meet at a quiet bar downtown, nothing too crazy. It was a Saturday evening, and I was in the mood for something chill. I didn't expect fireworks, just a nice conversation and a few drinks. I showed up early, sat at the bar, and ordered a glass of wine to calm my nerves. I was just about to check my phone when I saw him walk in. Chase had this confident stride, like he owned the place. He walked over with a smile, and we exchanged hugs. From the moment he sat down, I thought it was going well. We laughed, talked about the usual stuff, movies, work, and hobbies. The night felt easy, and I felt comfortable around him. But the vibe changed after a couple of hours. He started complimenting me more, first on my dress, then my smile, and eventually my eyes. It felt nice at first, but after a while, the compliments started feeling a bit forced. It was like he was trying a little too hard. Then, out of nowhere, he dropped a comment that caught me off guard. Chase said he thought I had the perfect body and that I was way hotter than the girls he normally dated. I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled awkwardly and changed the subject. It felt uncomfortable, but I didn't want to overthink it. People say weird things sometimes, right? We kept chatting, but I could tell he wasn't really listening anymore. His eyes would keep flicking to my phone, which was on the table between us. It wasn't that big of a deal, but it was like he was waiting for me to get a message. I wasn't exactly sure what he was thinking, but I wasn't about to jump to conclusions. I wasn't used to this kind of behavior, but I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. Eventually, the date ended. He offered to walk me back to my car, and I agreed. The night had gone well enough, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I had this uneasy feeling that wouldn't leave me. I brushed it off, thinking I was just overanalyzing things. When we said goodbye, he kissed me on the cheek, told me to text him when I got home, and walked away. It seemed like a normal ending to a normal date, or at least I thought so. The next day, I woke up to a message from Chase. It wasn't out of the ordinary at first, just in saying he had a great time and that he was looking forward to seeing me again. But then things got weird. He asked me to send him some pictures, and at first I wasn't sure what he meant. I figured he just wanted a photo from the night before, something casual to remember the date by. But then he clarified. He wanted explicit pictures. I was shocked. I stared at the screen, not sure what to do. I was thrown off, confused, and honestly, a little grossed out. Who asks for that right after a first date? I told him I wasn't comfortable with that it was too soon, but he kept insisting. He said something like, "You know you're gorgeous, right? I don't want to pressure you, but I'm not gonna lie, I'm really into you. It'd be a real shame if I had to find someone else who's willing to do this. It didn't take me long to realize what was going on. He was trying to manipulate me into doing something I wasn't ready for, and I felt disgusted. But at the same time, I was so confused. Was this how things worked for some people? Was I just out of touch with modern dating? I didn't know. I felt trapped. He didn't stop there. He made comments about how lucky I was to have a body like mine, how he'd love to see more, how everyone else is doing it. I'd already told him no, but he didn't listen. It wasn't until he threatened to block me and move on to someone else that I finally snapped. I told him if he blocked me, he wouldn't get a single photo, and he could just move on, like he was suggesting. I didn't want to give in to the pressure, but I didn't want him to think I was too uptight or whatever he was insinuating. I just wanted to get him off my back. So after going back and forth, I reluctantly sent him one photo. Nothing explicit, just a harmless selfie I had taken earlier in the day. The moment I hit send, I felt this pit in my stomach. I instantly regretted it, but it was too late. He saw it and said, "Perfect," but that was the last message I received from him. A few hours later, I checked my phone, expecting to see a response or maybe a follow-up message, but instead, I found that he had blocked me. Completely, no explanation, no apologies, just a cold, dead silence. It was like I didn't even exist to him anymore. I tried to search for him on social media, but everything was gone. No profile, no photos, no traces of him. He had vanished just like that. I was left feeling so confused and violated. The worst part, I had no idea what he was doing with the photo I sent him. Was he sharing it with his friends? Was he using it for something else? I'll never know, and that's the part that haunts me. I've never heard from him again, and honestly, I don't think I ever want to. It's been months, and I still think about it from time to time, wondering if he's done this to other women. What bothers me the most is that I'll never get an answer. And now, every time I meet someone new, I can't help but wonder, are they like Chase, pretending to be someone else to get what they want? It was a date I'll never forget. The lessons I learned the hard way stick with me now, but I still can't shake the feeling that I'll never truly know the extent of what he did with my photo. I didn't know what to expect when I signed up for a blind date, but nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. I'd been talking to Dilla for a few weeks over text and everything seemed pretty chill. We had a lot in common and she seemed cool. We both loved hiking, cooking, and going to dive bars for cheap drinks. So when she suggested we meet up at this cute little cafe downtown, I thought it would be a fun, low-key way to get to know each other. Boy, was I wrong. When I got to the cafe, I was a little early. I've been trying to get back into the habit of being punctual, so I figured I'd grab a coffee and wait. The place was small with cozy booths and a faint smell of cinnamon in the air. There was something kind of homey about it, which made me feel comfortable. I walked up to the counter, ordered a latte, and sat down by the window where I could keep an eye on the door. As I sat there, I started to get a little nervous. What if she wasn't as cool in person as she was over text? What if we had nothing to talk about? But then I remembered how easy it had been to talk to her online, and I told myself to relax. She'd be just like her photos, beautiful, confident, and chill. And then she walked in. Dilla was stunning. She had this kind of effortless beauty about her, like she wasn't trying too hard, but still looked like she'd just walked out of a fashion magazine. She smiled when she saw me, and I immediately stood up to greet her. It felt like everything was going smoothly. The conversation flowed. We had a good laugh about random stuff. And for a moment, I felt like I was actually enjoying the date. We talked about everything, our favorite movies, crazy childhood stories, and even plans for the future. It seemed like we were on the same wavelength. But then things started to get weird. About halfway through our date, I noticed a guy walk into the cafe. He wasn't wearing anything special, just a plain hoodie and jeans, but there was something about his presence that stood out. As soon as he stepped inside, his eyes locked on Dilla. I could feel the tension in the air as he made his way toward our table. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just a friend or a regular who came here often. But then the look on Dilla's face said otherwise. She seemed to stiffen, her smile faltering slightly. I could see her eyes darting between him and me. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just some casual acquaintance. It was something more, something way more uncomfortable. The guy stopped right next to our table, still staring at Della like he was about to rip her apart. I started to feel this weird pit in my stomach, the kind that only comes when you sense something's really off, but you can't put your finger on it. And then it happened. Without any warning, the guy swung his fist, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor with a ringing in my ears. I don't even think I saw the punch coming. It was like 1 second I was sitting there, and the next I was on the ground, feeling like my face had been hit by a freight train. I could taste blood in my mouth, and my vision was blurry. I heard Della scream my name, but it felt like I was in a bad dream, and nothing made sense. I tried to stand up, but my legs felt wobbly and my head was spinning. I looked up to see the guy standing over me, breathing heavily, his face a mix of rage and something else that looked like possessiveness. Dilla was standing next to him, her hand over her mouth, like she couldn't believe what had just happened. I could barely process anything at that moment, but the one thing that was crystal clear was that the guy wasn't a random stranger. He was with Della. I felt this wave of confusion, pain, and anger all at once. What the hell just happened? Who was this guy? Why didn't Dilla tell me? Was this some kind of sick joke? The guy just stared at me, not saying a word. He didn't even seem fazed by what he had just done. He was calm, like he expected this to happen. His eyes flicked to Dilla, and that's when I realized what was going on. This wasn't just a random outburst. This wasn't some spontaneous act of violence. No, this was something much worse. I don't know why, but I felt like I knew exactly what had just happened. Dilla had brought me here as some kind of bait. This wasn't a blind date at all. She'd set me up. She had a fiancé, and that fiancé was the guy who had just punched me in the face. As I struggled to get up, I looked at Dilla. She was still standing there, frozen, but it was like she was unsure of what to do. I couldn't tell if she was apologetic or just scared of the guy who had just knocked me down. She didn't say a word to me. She didn't even move to help me up. I could see the awkward tension between them, but it felt like I was invisible, like I was the one who didn't belong there. I pushed myself off the floor, my head still ringing, and backed away slowly. I didn't want to make things worse, but I was done. I wasn't going to stay there and let this play out any longer. I grabbed my bag, threw some cash on the table for the drinks, and walked out as fast as I could. My heart was pounding, and the adrenaline was still rushing through me, but I had to get out of there. I didn't even look back. I didn't block Dilla on social media right away. I wanted to hear her side of things, but she never reached out. She never apologized or explained anything. That's when I realized how messed up it was. I was just a pawn in some twisted game. I have no idea if she was trying to make her fiancé jealous or if she was just using me for something else, but all I know is that I'll never trust anyone like that again. I never heard from her again, and honestly, I'm glad I didn't. That date was enough of a nightmare for me to square off blind dates for good. I've always been the kind of guy who's up for trying new things, so when Lisa asked me to go with her to a football game on our blind date, I didn't think much of it. I wasn't huge on football, but I figured it would be fun. I was looking forward to hanging out with someone new, having some laughs, maybe a drink or two, and seeing how things went. But that day was the day I realized just how wrong a date could go. When I got to the stadium, Lisa was already waiting for me by the entrance. She looked great, jeans, a team hoodie, and a huge smile. It didn't take long for us to get inside, find our seats, and settle in. The place was packed, the energy was electric, and I could feel the buzz of excitement in the air. I didn't exactly know what to expect from a live football game, but I figured I'd get caught up in it, enjoy the crowd, and cheer for the team she was rooting for. At first, Lisa seemed chill. She was excited for sure, but it was nothing over the top. The first few minutes of the game went by with some light-hearted cheering and trash talk, but nothing I consider crazy. We were both watching the game, talking a little bit about the players, and generally just enjoying the atmosphere. But then, things started to get weird. As the game went on, Lisa's cheering took a turn. It wasn't just regular fun sports banter anymore. She was practically shouting at the players on the other team. She didn't just yell at the refs for bad calls. She went straight into full-on insults. Every time the opposing team made a play, she'd get up, wave her arms around, and scream some of the nastiest stuff I've ever heard at them. I'm talking about calling them everything from pathetic to losers. And at one point, I swear I heard her telling one player that they should just quit the game and save themselves the embarrassment. The whole thing was bizarre. I mean, I understand getting caught up in the excitement of a game, but this was something else entirely. Lisa wasn't just reacting to the game, she was on mission. She was literally sitting there, red in the face, absolutely losing it over every little thing that went wrong for the other team. It was like she had something personal against them, like she was taking the game way too seriously. And the swearing, it was nonstop. It wasn't just occasional bad words. It was like a constant stream of rage-fueled insults flying out of her mouth every few seconds. I tried to laugh it off at first, thinking it was just a phase. Maybe she was just having a rough day, or maybe this was just how she acted when her team was losing. But no, it didn't stop. It got worse, actually. As the game dragged on, she got louder, angrier, and more intense. People around us were starting to look at her. Some people even started moving away from our section. It wasn't long before I started feeling really uncomfortable. It wasn't just the volume or the swearing. It was the way she was behaving. There was this aggression in her voice, like she was about to jump over the railing and fight the other team herself. I started wondering if this was her normal behavior, if I was just some innocent bystander watching a meltdown in real time. I was kind of regretting agreeing to this date, to be honest. What had started out as an innocent idea for a date turned into this uncomfortable experience where I felt like I was trapped next to a ticking time bomb. And then came the moment that made me seriously question my decision to come to the game. The other team scored a touchdown, and Lisa completely lost it. I'm talking about a full-on explosion. She jumped up out of her seat, screaming and stomping her feet like she was going to start throwing things. She was so angry that her face turned beet red, and I'm pretty sure I could feel the heat radiating off of her. People were looking at us, well, at her, and some of them were even shaking their heads like they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to get up and leave, but I didn't want to make a scene. Plus, I didn't want to be rude, especially since she was my date. But then I started to wonder, if she's like this at a football game, what's she like in other situations? Was I really going to stick around for the rest of the game and see how far this would go? Lisa didn't stop there, though. She started shouting at the fans in the opposite section, hitting them the finger and yelling insults at them too. I swear, I felt like I was at a completely different event at that point. It was no longer about the game. It was just about her personal vendetta against whoever happened to be on the field wearing the wrong uniform. I was starting to think maybe she'd gotten into something before the game. Maybe she'd had a few drinks, or worse, maybe this was just her personality when she didn't get her way. I honestly didn't know how much longer I could take it. I had no idea if this was how she acted all the time or if she was just having one of those off days. I was beginning to feel scared, like maybe I was in over my head with this whole date. I mean, who behaves like this? At some point, I thought to myself, this isn't a date. This is a nightmare. Eventually, the game ended and her team won, but Lisa didn't calm down. If anything, she got worse. She was practically bouncing up and down, shouting in the face of the people around us like she had just won a war. The whole experience was just too much. I didn't want to be there anymore. I didn't want to be anywhere near her. By the time we left the stadium, I was just done. I tried to be polite and smiled, but deep down, I was already thinking of every excuse to never see her again. I kept my distance on a walk out, hoping I could just disappear into the crowd. The whole thing was a nightmare in slow motion. I had gone on what was supposed to be a fun, chill date and ended up stuck in the middle of an out-of-control situation. I never reached out to her again after that day. What I saw that night was enough to make me realize that sometimes what seems like a fun, harmless day can end up being a seriously weird and uncomfortable experience. I'd never thought a blind date could go this sideways. I was looking forward to a fun night, meeting a guy who seemed chill online, but Darren completely turned everything on its head. I heard horror stories from friends, but I never imagined one would happen to me. It all started with a dating app like a lot of modern stories do. I matched with Darren one lazy Sunday afternoon, and we hit it off right away. He was funny, seemed well-spoken, and his pictures were decent enough. Nothing too flashy, just a normal-looking guy with a love for the outdoors. We texted back and forth, and after a few days of chatting, we agreed to meet up at a cafe in the city. Nothing too fancy, just a casual place to grab a coffee and see if we clicked. I had my doubts about blind dates in general, but I figured I'd give it a shot. My friends told me to just go into it with low expectations, and I guess that advice was spot on. But even it couldn't have prepared me for what was about to go down. I arrived early to the cafe, as usual, and grabbed a table by the window. I checked my phone for messages, read a few texts from my mom, and before I knew it, Darren walked in. At first, he looked just like his pictures. Tall, in his late 20s, wearing a hoodie and jeans. He had a friendly smile, and I thought, okay, this could be cool. He sat down, and we started talking. The usual small talk at first, jobs, hobbies, mutual interests. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. But as the conversation continued, it started getting weird. He asked me about my apartment, how long I had lived there, and if I had any roommates. I told him that I lived alone with my 2 cats, which I adore. Honestly, they're my babies. But then he asked a question that made my stomach turn. Do you think you could ever live without them? I didn't understand at first. I laughed it off, thinking it was a joke, but he didn't smile or laugh. His face stayed serious as he leaned forward. You know, I'm allergic to cats, he said, his voice almost too calm. So I was thinking, if we get serious and I move in, you'll have to get rid of them. It's not something I can live with. The allergies, I mean, you could sell them, maybe, or give them away to a shelter. I froze. I wasn't sure if I had heard him right. My brain scrambled to process what he just said. Was he really telling me to get rid of my cats? I stared at him, trying to figure out if he was being serious. He didn't even seem uncomfortable talking about it, which made it worse. He was acting like this was a reasonable request. I couldn't believe it. No way. No way would I ever get rid of my cats just because he had an allergy. I loved them like family. They were my companions, my little furballs of comfort, and I wasn't about to throw that away for some guy I had just met. But Darren didn't stop there. He kept going, outlining how it would be easier for both of us if I just let them go. He even suggested I could sell them to someone who would be better suited for them, like it was a simple transaction, like I was buying a new couch or something. I felt a rush of anger flood through me. I tried to keep my cool, not wanting to make a scene in public, but my mind was racing. How could anyone be so entitled to ask someone to get rid of their pets like that? What kind of person even suggests something so outrageous? The fact that he was trying to act like it was just a simple solution made it worse. It was like he couldn't even grasp how important they were to me, how ridiculous this request was. I tried to change the subject, but Darren wasn't done. He seemed to get even more passionate, telling me how hard it would be for him to live in a house with cats, how the allergies would make him miserable. He said he would love to get to know me better, but it just wouldn't work out if I didn't make some sacrifices. He said it so nonchalantly, as if I should just understand his point of view. It was becoming clear to me that Darren didn't respect me or my choices. He wasn't interested in getting to know me as a person. He was more focused on what he wanted and how I could accommodate him. And to make matters worse, he was so sure of himself, like he'd already planned out how this was going to go, like it was a given that I would just give up my cats without hesitation. It made me question whether this was his usual approach to relationships, demanding things from people he barely knew. I was getting more and more uncomfortable as the conversation dragged on. He mentioned how his previous relationships had ended badly because of little things like this, and it became obvious that he wasn't seeing my point at all. I had spent the last few years building my life, creating a space I loved, with my cats at the center of it. And now here he was, asking me to get rid of them to make room for him. The worst part was Darren didn't even seem to notice that I was getting more upset. He just kept talking about how I could find a new home for them, as though it was the most reasonable thing in the world. It was honestly one of the most unsettling moments I've ever had. At that moment, I realized how little he valued my autonomy, my life, and the things that mattered to me. I didn't know what to say at first. I just stared at him, my mind trying to comprehend what had just happened. Was this guy really serious? Was I being pranked? I couldn't figure it out. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let some stranger dictate my life like that. The rest of the date was a blur, but it was clear to me that Darren was only interested in what was convenient for him. I told him I needed to go and left the cafe as fast as I could. As I walked home, my head was spinning. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I've had bad dates before, but nothing that made me feel so violated. I went straight home, hugged my cats, and vowed never to let someone like Darren into my life again. No matter how well someone might seem at first, people can have crazy, entitled expectations that you just can't ignore. And sometimes those expectations reveal a lot more about them than they do about you. That was the last time I ever saw Darren. It's been a few weeks now, and I still can't shake the weird, uncomfortable feeling from that date. Some people, it turns out, think they can just waltz into your life and tell you what to do. But no one is going to tell me to get rid of my cats. I still can't believe it. A blind date, just a simple dinner date that was supposed to be chill, turned into one of the weirdest nights of my life. I'm not the type to judge people based on their past, but what Pam told me completely threw me off. I'll never forget the moment it all clicked, and I realized that things were way more complicated than I could have ever imagined. It all started a few weeks ago when I matched with Pam on one of those dating apps. She was cute, funny, and seemed super down to earth. Her profile picture was a selfie in a park, looking all natural with no heavy makeup. I liked that about her. It felt real. We hit it off right away in our messages, joking about random stuff, talking about music and food, the usual. Nothing too deep at first, but it was fun and easy. She seemed normal, and that's all I could ask for when meeting someone for the first time. We decided on a restaurant that was a little more low-key, not too fancy, but nice enough that you'd want to look presentable. I showed up early, not wanting to be late, and when she walked in, I'll admit I was impressed. Pam had a warm, welcoming smile, and she looked way better in person than in her pictures, which is rare in my experience. Her outfit was casual but chic, just a black top, jeans, and boots. Nothing flashy, nothing over the top. We sat down and started chatting. The conversation was flowing pretty easily, which was great because, let's be honest, the whole first date awkwardness thing is real. At first, everything was going smoothly. We talked about all sorts of things: her job, my hobbies, our families. We even found out we had some mutual friends from college, which was a pretty nice coincidence. I was starting to think this could really go somewhere. But then, after a few glasses of wine and an hour or so of talking, she casually mentioned something that took me completely off guard. Pam was talking about how she used to live in a different city a few years back, and she casually mentioned how she had done a bunch of different jobs to make ends meet. I wasn't really paying full attention at first because we were talking about a bunch of random things, but then she dropped the bombshell. She mentioned that she used to work as a stripper. At first, I just blinked. It didn't register at first. I thought maybe I'd misheard her. The thing is, she said it so casually, almost like it was no big deal. She didn't seem embarrassed or like she was hiding anything. It just came out of nowhere. I could feel the awkwardness creeping in as I tried to process what she just said. She explained that it wasn't something she was proud of, but she had done it when she was younger because she needed the money. It was something she'd left behind, and she said, and that part of her life was in the past. Now, I don't want to sound judgmental because I really do believe that people can have a past and that it doesn't define who they are now. But for some reason, hearing it from her felt off. There was something about the way she spoke about it, like she was too nonchalant about it. How do you just casually talk about something like that on a first date? I could feel my heart rate picking up a little, and I had to force myself to focus on what she was saying. I tried to play it cool, thinking maybe she was just being honest and open, but it felt like a red flag. Sure, everyone has a past, but this was a lot to drop on someone you just met. Was she trying to make me feel comfortable with it, or was she testing my reaction? I couldn't tell. As the night wore on, I kept trying to steer the conversation in a different direction, but she kept coming back to her past. She talked about the people she worked with, how it was just a phase for her, and how she was happy to have moved on from it. She even mentioned how she was relieved to have left that part of her life behind. I tried to nod along and act like it was no big deal, but my mind was racing. Why would you bring that up on a first date if it was in your past? Was this something she was proud of? Was she looking for validation from me? The more she talked, the more uneasy I became. It wasn't that I couldn't handle hearing about someone's past, but there was something unsettling about the way she kept bringing it up, like she was looking for some sort of approval or acceptance. I didn't want to be rude, so I just kept listening, but it felt like I was drowning in a sea of awkwardness. As the night went on, I noticed something else that was bothering me. Pam seemed to have this air about her, like she wasn't really here for me. She wasn't really connecting with me in a way that made me feel like we were on the same page. It felt like she was more focused on telling me about her past than actually getting to know who I was. I began to wonder if this was a coping mechanism or if she genuinely didn't know how to connect with someone at a deeper level. At this point, I was just ready for the date to end. It wasn't that I was angry or upset. It was more like I was just overwhelmed. I couldn't shake the feeling that Pam wasn't being completely honest, not with me, but with herself. She seemed too eager to talk about a past that she claimed to have moved on from. It was like she was trying to convince me, and maybe herself, that it didn't matter. But the more she insisted, the more it felt like it did matter, at least to her. When the check came, I was relieved. We both paid our parts, and I made sure to end the date with a polite, friendly goodbye. But even as I walked away from the restaurant, I couldn't shake the sense of unease. Something didn't sit right with me about the whole night. I wasn't judging her for her past. I didn't care about that. But I couldn't help but feel like there was more to Pam than she was letting on. As I got into my car and drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about how strange the evening had been. I had met a girl who seemed nice at first, but as the night went on, I realized that sometimes people use their pasts as armor, even if they don't mean to. I still don't know what to make of Pam. I didn't reach out to her again, and I don't think I will. Maybe she was just looking for someone to talk to, or maybe she wanted validation for something she wasn't truly over. Either way, I don't think I'm ever going to forget that night and the way she dropped that bombshell so casually. Some people's pasts stay with them, whether they want them to or not. I'd never expected a blind date to be the start of one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. When I first matched with Bobby on a dating app, he seemed all right. His photos looked normal, nothing too out there, just a guy who liked sports and had some decent hobbies. He messaged me first, and we quickly hit it off with easy conversation. Nothing too deep, but it felt like a natural flow, and he seemed funny, so I agreed to meet him in person. We decided to go for dinner at a local Italian restaurant. It wasn't anything fancy, but it had decent reviews. I thought it'd be the kind of casual setting where we could get to know each other and see if there was any chemistry. He was on time, and that was a good start. But as soon as we sat down, I could tell something was off. Bobby was polite at first, but there was a weird energy. He seemed a little too eager, almost like he had an agenda. I shrugged it off, figuring he was just nervous. I was a little nervous too. We started talking about normal things. How our day was, the weather, random stuff that you talk about when you're making small talk on a first date. But then, out of nowhere, he made a comment that threw me completely off guard. It wasn't even related to what we were talking about at the time, but suddenly, he told me that I should seriously consider getting a boob job. At first, I thought I hadn't heard him right. I figured it was some kind of weird joke, maybe a bad attempt at flirting or something. I just blinked, unsure of how to respond, and asked him to repeat himself, thinking he might backpedal or laugh it off. But no, he didn't laugh. He just stared at me like it was no big deal, like he was offering me advice on what kind of salad dressing to choose. He started talking about how I had a great figure, but with a little enhancement, I could really stand out. It was like he was so sure of himself, like he thought that's what I wanted to hear. I can't even explain how uncomfortable it felt. I felt I was being sized up by someone I barely knew, and it wasn't flattering at all. Instead of being flattered, I felt objectified. My chest tightened, and I could feel my stomach churn. Why was he telling me this? Who says something like that on a first date? Trying to keep the mood light, I changed the subject. I didn't want to make a scene or get into an awkward confrontation on our first date. So I joked about how everyone's got their own things they're insecure about, but I didn't let it slide. I kept thinking about it, like what kind of guy just casually brings something like that up with someone he's just met? But Bobby wasn't done yet. It felt like the longer we talked, the worse it got. Every time I tried to steer the conversation in another direction, he'd come back to my appearance, and this time it wasn't just about my chest. He started talking about other things too. He complimented my outfit, but then quickly added that it could be even better if I wore certain things. Things that would accentuate my features. At that point, it felt like everything was being reduced to my body, my looks, and how I could improve them in his eyes. I tried to keep my cool, but on the inside, I was growing more and more uncomfortable. My food had arrived, and I wasn't even hungry anymore. The last thing I wanted was to keep sitting there, talking to someone who seemed to only see me as a project he could fix. He didn't know anything about me, yet here he was, telling me how I could change myself to fit some ideal he had in his head. I started to pick at my food, pretending to eat, but I wasn't even tasting it. In the back of my mind, I kept thinking, is this how it always is? Do guys always see women as something to be improved, something that needs to fit their standards? It got worse when Bobby brought up the subject of plastic surgery again. This time, he mentioned that a lot of women he knew had gotten enhancements, and they felt so much better about themselves afterward. He was talking about it like it was no big deal, as if all the women around him were just walking around getting surgery on a whim. And when he looked at me, he actually said that I had so much potential if I just did something with myself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was this really happening? Was this the kind of guy I had agreed to meet? It felt like he was treating me like a blank canvas, just waiting for his improvements. By the time dessert came, I was ready to leave. But I didn't want to be rude, so I kept pretending that I was still trying to enjoy myself. But I could tell Bobby didn't pick up on my discomfort. He went on talking about how much money I could make if I had the right look, and that I could even get sponsored for my new appearance. I was done. There was no way I could sit there any longer. I started to gather my things, but Bobby seemed oblivious to my obvious discomfort. He went on talking like everything was fine, as if I wasn't planning to walk out the door at any second. When the bill came, I paid my half quickly, trying not to make eye contact with him. I could feel my pulse racing. I just wanted to get out of there. I didn't even say goodbye. I just left. I was shaken up, to be honest, not because of the dinner itself, but because of the way Bobby had reduced me in my body. It felt like he didn't even see me as a person. I've gone on bad dates before, but nothing like this. I don't know if he truly thought he was giving me advice, or if he was just one of those guys who thinks he can say whatever comes to his mind. Either way, it was deeply unsettling. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about how people could be so disconnected from reality. I didn't know if Bobby thought I'd be flattered by his advice, or if he honestly believed that was just how things were. Either way, I never heard from him again, and honestly, I'm glad. It's not often you meet someone who gives you such an immediate gut feeling that they're completely wrong for you. In the end, it was a reminder that not all first dates are the magical, sparkly experiences that people hope for. Sometimes you meet people who make you question not just their judgment, but yours too. I learned that night that no matter what happens, it's always better to trust your gut. It was supposed to be a simple blind date, nothing too fancy. I'd met Anna on a dating app, and we had exchanged a few messages that felt pretty normal. She was attractive, easy to talk to, and seemed down to earth enough. After chatting for a while, we decided to meet at this cozy little restaurant downtown. I picked the place because it wasn't too expensive, but it wasn't a dive either, just a solid spot for a casual first date. I showed up a bit early, ordered a drink, and waited. Anna wasn't late, which was a good sign. When she walked in, she was dressed to impress. Nice dress, perfect hair, makeup that was just right. I couldn't help but feel a little underdressed in comparison, but it didn't matter. I was just hoping we'd hit it off and have a good time. We sat down, and things started out pretty normally. We chatted about the usual stuff: work, hobbies, travel. Nothing out of the ordinary. She seemed pleasant, even if a little more high maintenance than I'd expected. I didn't mind at first. Everyone has their quirks, right? But then, as we got deeper into the conversation, things started to take a weird turn. Anna mentioned how long it had taken her to get ready for the date. She went into detail about the hours she'd spent getting her hair done, the makeup process, and how she had to find the perfect outfit. She even mentioned a few times how much money she'd spent on her appearance, which I thought was a bit odd, but didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't until the bill came that things got really uncomfortable. The waiter brought over the check, and I grabbed it instinctively, thinking I'd pay since I'd asked her out. But before I could take out my wallet, Anna stopped me. She looked at me seriously and said, "You're paying for the meal, right? And also, I'm going to need you to transfer me the money for the time it took me to get ready." I didn't understand at first. I thought maybe she was joking, so I laughed nervously, waiting for her to laugh with me. But she didn't. Her expression stayed completely serious. "Yeah, she continued, "the time I spent getting ready, hair, makeup, picking the right outfit. I'm going to need you to cover that. It's only fair." My stomach dropped. I stared at her, trying to figure out if she was serious or just pulling some weird joke. But there was no joking in her face. She was dead serious. I asked her to explain, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood, but she just doubled down. She said it took her 3 hours to get ready, and that time had value. I was a little floored by the audacity, but at the same time, I didn't know what to do. I mean, what do you even say to something like that? Anna went on to say that she expected the total amount of time spent getting ready, including her hair and makeup, to be compensated. She even had an exact figure in mind, something like a few $100, based on her hourly rate. It felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality, but I still wasn't sure if she was being serious. Maybe she was testing me or something. I wasn't sure. I tried to keep my cool and offered to pay for the meal, which I thought was reasonable enough. But then she started to get more aggressive. She insisted that I pay for her time and that it was a non-negotiable part of the date. As she spoke, it became clear she wasn't going to back down. Her tone was sharp, and she was starting to look more impatient, almost like I was wasting her time by not agreeing to her demands. I couldn't believe what was happening. I felt completely blindsided. I'd been on dates before, and I even had some awkward moments, but this This was next level. I wasn't prepared for this kind of behavior. She wasn't just asking for a free meal. She was literally demanding that I compensate her for every minute she'd spent on herself. It felt like I was being extorted, like she was treating the date as some kind of business transaction. At that point, I started to feel like I had to make a decision. Part of me wanted to just get up and walk away, but I also didn't want to cause a scene. The restaurant was crowded, and I could already feel the eyes of other people on us. Anna seemed to notice my hesitation and smirked, almost as if she had already won the battle. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, clearly expecting me to agree. I told her that I wasn't comfortable with what she was asking for and that I wasn't going to send her money for something that felt completely ridiculous. She didn't react well to that. She started talking about how she'd never settle for less and how she wasn't going to waste her time with someone who couldn't even respect the value of her time. The tension in the air was unbearable. I couldn't sit there for another minute. I stood up, apologized for the awkwardness, and started to leave. I wasn't going to give her anything, and I certainly wasn't going to give in to her demands. But as I walked out of the restaurant, I could hear her calling after me, her voice rising with frustration. I didn't look back. That was the end of the date, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. How could anyone be so bold? What kind of person would go on a blind date with someone and demand money for their time getting ready? It wasn't just about the money. It was about the way she thought she was entitled to it. I didn't hear from Anna after that night, and honestly, I'm kind of relieved. I'm not sure if she was expecting me to be one of those guys who would just give in, but I wasn't going to play her game. It was one of the strangest, most uncomfortable experiences I've ever had, and I'm just glad I walked away from it. I guess sometimes you learn the hard way that not all blind dates are what they seem, and not everyone you meet has good intentions. I'll never forget that night. It was supposed to be a simple blind date, nothing too serious. I was just looking for a fun evening, maybe a good laugh, something to take my mind off work and the endless cycle of stress I'd been stuck in. But what started as a casual date quickly turned into one of the most unsettling nights of my life. I met Zane through a dating app. His profile seemed pretty standard. He was tall, with an easy smile, and liked all the things I thought were cool. He seemed normal. Too normal, I guess. We talked for a few days, and he seemed charming, polite, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a week of chatting, he suggested we meet up at a cafe downtown, a place I'd been to a couple of times before. It sounded perfect. Nothing fancy, just two people getting to know each other over coffee. The day of the date came, and I was feeling a little nervous but mostly excited. I'd been on a few blind dates before, and while none of them had turned into anything serious, they were still fun enough. Zane had already promised that he was going to bring his best self, and that he was looking forward to seeing me. I even got a little message from him an hour before the date, just to let me know he was excited and couldn't wait to meet me. That was sweet, right? When I arrived at the cafe, I immediately saw him sitting by the window, tapping away at his phone. He looked just like his pictures, tall, dark hair, dressed casually. He smiled when he saw me walk in, and I waved back. He stood up to greet me, and we shook hands. The awkwardness of meeting someone new didn't last long, and we quickly fell into a conversation about music, movies, and the usual things people talk about when they're trying to break the ice. But the whole time, there was something off. Something about the way he was looking at me. His eyes didn't wander or shift around like most people's do when you're having a casual chat. No, his eyes were locked on me, and it wasn't just that he was paying attention. It was like he was studying me. And the longer we talked, the more uncomfortable I started to feel. Every time I mentioned something about my day or my life, he seemed to already know about it. It wasn't just generic stuff either. He'd comment on things that were too specific, too personal. I remember talking about how I'd gone to the gym earlier that morning, and he casually mentioned how he knew the instructor I liked at the yoga studio I sometimes went to. How did he know that? I hadn't even mentioned which gym I went to, let alone the instructor. I tried to laugh off at first, thinking it was just a coincidence, but then it kept happening. Every detail I shared, he already knew. My favorite cafe, the bakery I visited last week, the hiking trail I'd been to last weekend. It was all like he had somehow been following me. I brushed it off, thinking maybe he had just done some light social media snooping, or perhaps it was all just coincidental. I told myself I was overthinking things, but the more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. His questions weren't just about what I liked or what I'd been doing lately. They were about things I had never shared with anyone, like the time I'd gone to a concert last month by myself, or how I've been struggling with a family issue that only my close friends knew about. These weren't things that could be easily found online, at least not unless you were digging for them. But what really hit me was when he asked me about my childhood dog, the one I'd lost when I was 12. How could he possibly know about that? I hadn't posted anything about it in years, and certainly not anything that would make it so well known to a stranger. I asked him how he knew all of this, trying to keep my voice light, but the way he responded made my stomach drop. He smiled a little too smugly and said, "I pay attention to the people I care about." That was the moment it hit me. Something was seriously off. I wanted to leave right then, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. He hadn't done anything overtly dangerous or threatening, so I stayed. I kept trying to rationalize it, telling myself that maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, there's always a chance someone could be a little too observant, right? As the night went on, I started to get more and more uncomfortable. It wasn't just his knowledge of my life that was creeping me out. It was the way he was acting. He was too intense, too focused. He wasn't just interested in getting to know me. He seemed to want to own me, to lock me into his world. He started making comments about how we were meant to meet, how everything had led to this moment, and how we'd be great together. It didn't feel like a compliment anymore. It felt like an obsession. Eventually, I decided it was time to go. I excused myself, saying I had an early morning the next day, but the moment I stood up to leave, he didn't even flinch. He didn't ask if I'd like to do this again, or if we could exchange numbers. He just stood there, smiling. That smile, it wasn't a smile of someone hoping for another date. It was a smile of someone who had already decided this was more than just a casual coffee. As I left the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That was just the beginning, though. The next day, I started noticing strange things. A text from a number I didn't recognize, but when I opened it, it was a picture of my favorite coffee mug, taken at what looked like my apartment. It wasn't a full shot, but just enough to show my living room. I had no idea how he had gotten in there. No idea how he'd even known where I lived. But the more I thought about it, the more it started making sense. The way he'd known about my favorite coffee mug in my hometown, the small details of my life, he was watching me. I started to dig deeper and quickly realized the truth. Zane had been stalking me for months, maybe even longer. I wasn't the first person he tried to target, but I was definitely the one who had caught his attention. I had become his obsession, and he had been planning this date for a long time. The realization made my skin crawl. I blocked his number immediately and did everything I could to erase any trace of him from my life. I even went so far as to change my routines, stay in different places, and even contacted a few close friends to warn them. I don't know how long it took him to realize I wasn't responding, but the messages stopped coming. The weird pictures stopped appearing. I never saw him again, but I'll always wonder how deep his obsession went, and how close I came to something much worse. That date was supposed to be a fun night out with someone new. Instead, it turned into a reminder that sometimes the people you meet online are not who they say they are, and some will go to terrifying lengths to make you part of their world. I've never thought a blind date could go from promising to downright terrifying in a matter of minutes. I'd signed up for this whole thing on a whim. It wasn't like I was actively searching for someone to date, but a couple of friends kept pushing me to meet someone new, so I figured why not. It was supposed to be simple, just a casual coffee at a local cafe to see if we clicked. No pressure, right? So there I was walking into the cafe after getting the text that Natasha had arrived. I had no idea what she looked like, but I figured it would be easy enough to spot her. One of those she'll probably recognize me first situations. The place was cozy, not too crowded, and smelled like fresh pastries and espresso. Perfect setting for a first date. As I walked in, I spotted a girl sitting at a corner table, glancing up from her phone with a soft smile. My first thought was, okay, cool, she looks normal. I walked over and smiled and extended my hand for a greeting. But as soon as I got close enough, her eyes lit up like she already knew me. I thought that was a bit odd, but maybe she was just being friendly. But then she hit me with something that stopped me in my tracks. "You're wearing the same jacket you wore last Thursday when you went to that concert with your friends, right? You love that jacket. Has that weird stain on the sleeve from when you spilled beer on it last year. You still haven't gotten it cleaned up," she said, almost laughing like we were old friends. I had froze for a second. What the hell? I hadn't told anyone about the jacket or the stain or the concert. Only my closest friends knew about it. It felt like she just read my entire life story. But I didn't say anything at first. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence, or she had seen a photo of me on social media. People do that all the time, right? We sat down, and the date started out pretty normal, at least for the first few minutes. She was attractive, and her smile was warm. We talked about the usual stuff, where we grew up, what we did for fun, our families, but then it got weirder. She knew things, way too many things. I've seen you at that diner near your place a couple of times. You always sit at the same booth by the window, right? I think it was last Tuesday I saw you there with your brother. I could hear you talking about that trip you took to the mountains last summer. You love that place, right? She continued, not waiting for me to respond. I started feeling a bit uncomfortable. How could you know that? I didn't mention my brother or that trip to anyone, except for maybe my family, not even on social media. And yet, she was rattling off these details like she had been shadowing me. At this point, I wasn't sure whether to laugh it off or call it quits, but the coffee was already in front of me, and I figured I could just power through the weirdness. The more she talked, the worse it got. She started describing places I went, people I knew, things I'd done, all in eerie detail. The kicker was when she started describing my favorite spots in the city, the ones I went to when I just wanted to be alone. The little park by the river, the cafe with a jazz band playing on Sunday mornings. All these places I'd never told anyone about. She had no reason to know those things. It felt like she had been following me for weeks, maybe months. Her words began to blur into a stream of unsettling facts. She knew my high school nickname, the type of music I listened to when I was in a bad mood, the hobbies I had when I was a kid. It was like she had access to every part of my life, every detail I had kept private. I could feel my heart rate picking up, my palms starting to sweat. She smiled, oblivious to the growing sense of dread that was building inside me. I love how you're always looking for new places to go hiking. I think you're a bit of a loner, huh? That's cute, she said, leaning forward, her voice soft but insistent. You like being alone sometimes, don't you? I felt trapped. Her eyes locked onto mine, and it was like she was studying me, not in an innocent way, but in a way that made my skin crawl. It wasn't the kind of stare someone gives when they're interested in you. It was more like she was taking mental notes, measuring every move I made. The conversation kept spiraling. Every time I thought about redirecting it or changing the subject, she'd come up with something else, something more personal. She even brought up my job, how I'd been promoted last year, how I'd been struggling with a big project, stuff I hadn't talked about with anyone except my coworkers. The whole time, I kept trying to figure out how she knew all this. Maybe I'd mentioned some things to mutual friends. Maybe she was just really good at stalking my social media. But the things she knew, they were too specific, too personal. No one could have known those details unless they'd been in my life for a long time. My anxiety was through the roof, but I didn't want to be rude and just leave. I mean, this was supposed to be a date, right? But at this point, I was starting to wonder if I was in actual danger. The way she kept smiling at me, the way she leaned in just a little too close. It felt like she was getting a little too attached, a little too comfortable. I tried to make an excuse to leave. I said I had a meeting in the morning, I had to get home early, but she wouldn't let me go. Her grip on the conversation tightened, her words becoming more insistent. It was clear she didn't want the night to end. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up quickly, practically knocking my chair over. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know how to make this stop, but I needed to get out of there. I left the cafe as fast as I could, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my keys. I didn't look back. The next day, I got a text from Natasha. It was a simple message. I really enjoyed our date last night. I hope we can see each other again soon. I didn't reply. The truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly escaped something truly unsettling. How had she known all that about me? And more importantly, why did it feel like she was trying to make me her world, to lock me into a life I wasn't ready for? I never went on a date with her again, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever want to meet someone again who knows me like that. Some things are better left unknown. It started as a casual thing. I was talking to this girl named Nora for a while, and everything seemed pretty chill. We matched on a dating app, and from the get-go, she seemed really sweet. There was this charm to her that was hard to ignore, and we quickly clicked in conversation. She had that kind of energy where she made everything sound fun, even the most basic things. I wasn't expecting anything crazy from our first date. I was just hoping for a nice evening, maybe some food, and see where things went. But oh boy, nothing could have prepared me for how quickly things would take a weird turn. We met up at a little Italian restaurant in the city, One of those cozy spots with dim lighting and old school charm. I thought it was the perfect place for a first date. Calm, not too loud, and a good menu. Nara was already sitting at the table when I walked in. She was wearing this soft blue dress, and her hair was done up in loose waves. At first, everything seemed pretty normal. She was smiling when I walked over, and we exchanged some pleasantries. We started talking about the usual things: work, hobbies, stuff we like to do on weekends. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then, after we'd been talking for a bit, she hit me with something I didn't expect at all. It wasn't just random small talk anymore. She turned to me, leaned in a little, and said, "So, are you ready to propose?" I thought I heard her wrong. I mean, who just says that out of nowhere, right? I laughed, assuming she was joking, but she wasn't smiling. She didn't look like she was trying to make a joke. It threw me off completely. She explained, "I want you to propose to me tonight. If you really want to be with me, you have to marry me before anything happens. I won't lose my virginity until I'm married." Her voice was so calm, so matter of fact, like she was telling me it was just another step in the evening. I didn't know what to say. I sat there for a moment, feeling my heart start to race. This was not what I signed up for. I mean, we were just meeting each other for the first time. The whole idea of a proposal was so out of left field, and the fact that she brought it up as if it was a given made me feel like I had walked into some kind of trap. She went on about how important marriage was to her and how she had certain values she'd been raised with. I tried to process it, but all I could focus on was the pressure. She was literally telling me to propose to her before even having a proper date. She mentioned that if I truly respected her, I would understand her boundaries. She made it sound like if I didn't propose, I wasn't worthy of her time or attention. I was still trying to figure out if she was messing with me or being serious, but her tone was too serious. It was like she had this expectation that I would just agree without question. She didn't seem the least bit phased that we had just met. I felt cornered, but at the same time, I didn't know how to get out of it without seeming rude or judgmental. As the night went on, it didn't get any better. I kept trying to steer the conversation to lighter topics, but she kept circling back to the same thing: marriage, virginity, boundaries. It was like I wasn't allowed to just be a guy on a date with her. I was suddenly supposed to be a guy ready to propose and commit, all before knowing anything about who she really was. The longer we sat there, the more I started to realize how uncomfortable I was. I don't know why, but there was something unsettling about how demanding she was, as if the whole thing was a test. She wasn't just asking for a proposal, she was demanding it. It wasn't about getting to know each other. It was like she had already decided this was going to be the outcome. It wasn't just that either. She started talking about how she'd been hurt in the past. She told me stories about previous relationships that sounded like they had ended because the guy she was with didn't understand her values. She painted herself as someone who had been let down by men who couldn't commit and didn't respect her boundaries. Honestly, it felt like she was trying to make me feel guilty for even questioning her request. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it. Maybe she was just really traditional. Maybe it was just a cultural thing. But the more she went on about it, the more I started to get this pit in my stomach. It wasn't just about the proposal anymore. It was about her trying to manipulate the situation and turn it into something it wasn't. She was putting all this pressure on me to decide, to commit, before I even had a chance to get to know her. There was no way I was going to propose to someone I just met. I didn't even know if we were a good match. I was still trying to wrap my head around why she thought this was even remotely acceptable. By the end of the night, I had no idea how to get out of the situation. I couldn't just say, "I'm not proposing." It would have been too rude. So instead, I tried to be as polite as possible, telling her that I wasn't ready for that kind of commitment, and that maybe we should just get to know each other better before jumping into something so serious. Her face fell, and the mood completely shifted. The rest of the evening was awkward, and I couldn't wait to get out of there. I paid the bill, because I felt like I had to, and I wasn't going to have her hold it against me, but I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I walked out of the restaurant, feeling like I had just experienced something strange and off-putting. I was exhausted mentally. It was like I had been hit with a tidal wave of pressure, and I didn't even know how to react. That wasn't a date. That was some weird, intense transaction. And to be honest, I couldn't wait to leave it all behind. I blocked her number that night. I didn't want to deal with that kind of manipulation again. Dating should be about getting to know someone, not rushing into these huge life decisions without even knowing if you actually like the person. I never saw Nara again, and I don't regret it one bit. It started like any other blind date. I was a little nervous, of course. Who wouldn't be? You've heard the stories about people meeting someone off an app and things going south. But Rob seemed cool in his messages. He wasn't creepy, at least not at first. A little forward, maybe, but I figured it was just part of the whole getting to know someone thing. It wasn't my first date from an app, and honestly, it was starting to feel like maybe I was getting the hang of it. We met at this cute little cafe on the outskirts of the city. I thought it'd be quiet enough to have a conversation without a bunch of distractions. The place had this cozy vibe to it, with dim lighting and mismatched furniture, like someone just threw it all together for a chill vibe. Raj was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, looking up from his phone as I walked in. He smiled at me, and I smiled back, though I could feel a flutter of nerves in my stomach. It wasn't that I didn't find him attractive. He was decent looking, tall, and had this casual yet sharp look to him. But there was something in his eyes, something a little too intense. Still, I let it go, hoping it was just me overthinking things. I mean, first dates are always awkward, right? We got our drinks and sat down. I don't remember exactly what we talked about at first, just the usual work, hobbies, stupid stories from childhood. Nothing that made me feel too uncomfortable. The conversation was flowing, and it started to feel like a normal date. But there was one thing. Raj had this weird habit of looking at me a little too much. Not just in a checking you out kind of way, but in a staring at you like he's studying you way. It was subtle, but it was starting to creep me out. Every time I laughed, I'd catch him staring at my mouth like he was analyzing how my lips moved. Every time I shifted in my seat, his eyes followed the movement. I tried not to make it awkward, though. Vidigat was overthinking things. He was just trying to be nice, right? But then the conversation shifted. Out of nowhere, Raj dropped a question that made me freeze in my seat. He asked me if I'd ever sent someone feet pictures before. I remember blinking, completely thrown off. What kind of question was that? I laughed nervously, thinking maybe I'd misheard him. But no, he asked again, only this time he wasn't smiling. It wasn't a joke, it wasn't playful banter. I tried to brush it off. I said, "No, that's a little weird. Why would anyone do that?" He just shrugged, but his eyes lingered on my feet for way too long. It made me feel weird, but I didn't say anything. I just let the conversation drift to something else, something safer. But as the night wore on, the questions started getting stranger. Raj began asking if I had any weird habits, like how I sat in the toilet or if I'd ever taken pictures while I was in the bathroom. I couldn't help but laugh at first, but then he pushed. It wasn't like he was joking anymore. He was dead serious. He asked if I'd ever taken pictures while I was using the toilet. He even said it would be kind of sexy, like he was trying to convince me it was a normal thing to do. I was uncomfortable, but I didn't want to make a scene. Maybe he was just weird. Some people are a little offbeat, right? I gave him a tight smile and told him I wasn't into that sort of thing. But that didn't stop him. By the end of the night, as we were getting up to leave, Raj casually mentioned how he'd like me to send him pictures of my feet. He made it sound so normal, like it was just something every girl did for fun. But I felt my stomach drop. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to be rude or make a scene, so I just laughed awkwardly again, grabbing my purse and standing up. "Oh, yeah, that's not really my thing. Maybe we should just call it a night." Raj didn't look mad. He didn't even seem bothered. He just smiled like he thought I was playing hard to get. But I was done. I made an excuse about having an early morning, and he seemed fine with it. He walked me to my car, gave me a quick hug, and told me he'd love to see me again sometime. But something about his voice, the way he said it, sent a weird chill down my spine. I didn't think I'd hear from him again, honestly. But the next day, I had a text from Raj. It was weird. He was being friendly, like nothing had happened. He asked me if I'd reconsidered sending him a few pictures. I thought it was a joke at first, but then I realized it wasn't. He was serious. I didn't respond. Not at first. I just sat there staring at my phone, unsure of what to do. But then, a few hours later, he texted again. This time, he was more insistent. "Come on, just a few pics of your feet. I promise I'll make it worth your while. Don't be shy." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a weird joke. It was something else. I blocked him. I didn't want to give him any more attention, but part of me still felt sick to my stomach. Was this guy following me? Was he looking at my social media to track me down? I didn't know. I just wanted him out of my life. But then the next day there was another message. This time, it wasn't just about feet pictures. He asked me to send him a picture of me on the toilet. He said he'd pay me for it, and that it would be funny. He even tried to convince me it wasn't weird. I was repulsed. I reported him and blocked him again, but something about it kept nagging at me. The worst part, I didn't feel like I could talk to anyone about it. I felt embarrassed, ashamed, almost like I let this happen. How did I let it go on that long? I should have trusted my gut from the beginning. I never saw Raj again. I never answered any more of his messages. But to this day, when I get a weird text or an unexpected message from someone I don't know, it sends a shiver down my spine. Because the thing is, there are people out there who can turn the most innocent of situations into something totally messed up. And no matter how normal a person seems at first, sometimes you just can't shake that gut feeling that something isn't right. I learned the hard way that you can't ignore those red flags.